Greetings, my
Hey sister, how you doing? Did you know that you're beautiful, beautiful? Hey sister, there ain't no choosing. Did you know that you're beautiful, beautiful?
Greetings, Salaam Alaikum, Namaste, Etesen, Bawani, and the list goes on. My name is Kai Quotasia, and you are here on the Eyeame channel. Welcome. I hope you're all well. Today I am doing a book review. Oh look, here it is. I'm doing a book review on Sula, written by Toni Morrison. First of all, I think it's really important that everybody reads. Every single person reads. And the reason for that is our minds are becoming clueless. Most of us don't have to use our mind anymore. So we're not. And life's just becoming easier. So our brain is not as sharp as it should be. Our vocabulary is not as wide as it could be. I think reading is a really, really helpful resource. I want to bring a book series / a book project to the Eyeame channel, and this is the reason why. When I finished reading this book, when I was looking at the reviews, a lot of them were like really academic, and they used like all of these eloquent and like very, very linguistic words, and I was thinking like most people do not understand these words. I myself have like a small rough idea. I'm applying context here, but it should not be a small community of people that can read literature. Literature should be available and accessible to all. So I thought, hopefully, fingers crossed, the intention is that I can be the bridge, that I can interpret it in a way that is digestible to many, especially to young people who maybe weren't encouraged to read growing up and want to take that habit or that hobby into adult life. Remember, Eyeame is all about providing resources and life skills to young women. So with that being said, let's get into the review. Toni Morrison's literature, or I kind of feel like maybe literature in general, Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou, their books kind of have the vibe of the Bible. You're not just reading and what is being said is what it means. You have to digest it. They write poetically. They write metaphorically. What's just come to me is like reading the first 2 chapters was the equivalent of, you know, like your first day of school or your first day of uni, and everything just feels very clunky. You're like bouncing around. Everything's not settled. There's no routine. There's no schedule. You don't know where your classes are. You don't know what highlight you're going to need. You don't know how your lecturer's going to interact with you. That's what the first chapters felt like when I was reading it. I think I should also mention why I picked up this book. So I love Jamila Woods, and she had this album come out, Legacy, whereby she named all of the songs after like a lot of African American greats. Shortly after Legacy came out, she released a single called Sula, and that's what inspired me to get the book. That was like the send-off. In addition, Toni Morrison, I think she passed in 2018, I'm not sure. I'll check it out if I'm wrong. So she passed in 2018, and like all of the people that I follow on social media was going like crazy, like, oh my gosh, we've lost the great, we've lost the legend. The best way I can honour her is getting to know her work once she has transitioned. So I read The Bluest Eye. I think I'd have to reread it again to give a proper review, but I have just finished Sula and I am here to review this. So let's touch on how black women are described in the book. So the book is actually set in, I think the first chapter is 1917, and so it was almost 100 years before my time. And the way I read black women in today's literature, they're empowered, or they are seeking empowerment, but that didn't seem the way in this book. So let me just set the synopsis. In a small rural area in the state of Ohio, a predominantly black area where class is kind of irrelevant, and we see the journey between Sula and Nell, who are the main characters. We also have the sub characters of their family members, and we see how their life strangely interconnects as young women traveling and exploring adolescence, the life decisions that they have chosen, how it impacts their friendship. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that this book, if you're going to read it or you're going to dive into it, you need to be warned. What you see at first is not what's going to happen. Just be open to the idea that your whole world can get switched. Initially, I looked at, like, Sula is the bad girl and Nell is the good girl. Nell is the one that abides by her mum. Nell's mum, I can't remember her name right now, but she had a very clean, meticulous house. Actually, a lot of it is very interesting as well, because a lot of the characters, through my contemporary perspective, had a lot of mental disorders, but that wasn't really touched on. It was the norm for these children to be neglected. Parents neglected children different to how parents neglect children these days. The root of Sula and Nell's friendship was the abandonment and neglect that they experienced from their parents and their family. It allowed for them to become like gelled together, and despite their social class, the duo became an entity that helped govern and navigate life. Because Nell was so accustomed to being obedient and well behaved, and Sula came from a lot more of a open background. She was allowed to explore. Her mum didn't, that's very interesting, her mum didn't adhere to social norms, neither did her grandmother. There was no reference to Sula's dad or granddad or any male family member, and I think that was done intentionally too, to show that these women were like wild women. They ran free, they did as they pleased. They put a bad taste in the other women of Medallion's mouth who attended church and followed social norms, and the fact that these women, you know, indulged in sexuality and embraced being flirtatious in a way that puts, you know, marriage and monogamy into question and could potentially be harmful to the relationships in such a small village. It kind of trickled down, it definitely trickled down into how Sula perceived the world. When I think of a phrase or like a few words that summarizes Sula, it would be, if being wrong is wrong, I don't want to be right. She just did not see social norms at all. She didn't adhere to them. She didn't approve of them. She was well ahead of her time. She's cognition. She thinks, she evaluates all that's in front of her. She doesn't take things for, you know, face value. She digs deep. She sees what she wants. She does what she pleases. She does what she likes. And that's kind of the culture that we're moving into now. But 100 years ago, that wasn't it. And so because she did not adhere to such ideas, automatically she was tossed away. They even make reference to her as being a witch and being evil. So there was a few kind of inklings that made me think, what's wrong with her? Like, what happened to this gal? The first of which, so Sula and Nell used to walk the long way around to get back home from school, and the reason they did this is because there were some racist white boys that used to kind of like bad them up. So Sula said, you know what, yeah, I've had enough of this, these are taking the mick. And she went past them. So when she went past them, their tauntingness became louder and they were getting prepared for them. Sula took out a knife and, like, I think either mutilated or chopped off her little finger and said, if I can do this to myself, what do you think I can do to you? At 12 years old, that is a very, very mad statement to make, but also it shows her powerfulness, her bluntness. She didn't think there was a need to walk around a long way. She just thought, listen, this is what I'm doing. That's it. She was very streamlined in her thinking. The issue that Sula also faced was that she lived in a close-knit community. If she lived in somewhere like London or New York, there wouldn't be as much people knowing all the ins and outs, all the isms and schisms of her business and her family. But because she was so, what's the word? She was almost an antagonist, but not really. What's the word? How do you describe Sula? She was so against the grain. Being in such a restrictive community is what was difficult for her. And it's ironic because they considered her to be a witch and to be, you know, this awful person that you have to protect your children from and hide your husbands from, yet and still condemning somebody in that way is evil and unhealthy in of itself. But it's just weird how, because she was one person and she was doing wrong, they were able to exclude her and marginalize her. But when everybody treats one person bad, it's okay because it's culturally acceptable. It's kind of like, you know, that we had it in our school, and now looking back in hindsight, it's so bad, man. You know, there's like this one child that teachers turn their blind eye to seeing them being bullied. That's kind of how Sula was. But Sula didn't care. Like, that's the difference. Sula didn't give a heck. I've also written here that Sula was both a conformist and a rebel against her medallion community, but followed and amplified her lineage norm. Aha. Right. So because she was not adhering to people on the outskirts, people outside of her home's ideas of, you know, going to school, getting married young, having children, being a good housewife. So in that sense, yes, she was a rebel, but she was kind of quite conforming and quite good at following the pathology that her grandmother and her mother had put out for her in, again, indulging in her sexuality. She had a insatiable desire for sex, and she did not try to like deter it at all. Nell's character was off-putting. Her mum's meticulousness and her mum's like very straight and narrow way of doing things, to me, should have made her want to burst out of her bubble. Sometimes she was an adult and was liberated or had access to be liberated. So the fact that she continued to choose, you know, doing the right thing, doing this and doing that and doing this, although there didn't really seem a desire for it. Nell also married her husband because she wanted to feel wanted. She liked the feeling of being needed and having a place and having a position. But I didn't mention how much she loved him and admired him. She loved how he smelled. She loved his broad shoulders. She loved how he worked hard. That wasn't discussed at all. So for her, that's really weird. Okay, my mind just said, in a way, that's kind of like it had a narcissistic tendency. She used him as a mold, as a corset for herself. I will be his wife, but not admiring and loving him for him. Again, this was 100 years ago, so maybe clearly the ideologies have changed. Overall, she was like the good of the two, the good friend. She followed her mum on the train, attended church. Nell is not as good of a character as she first appears. When you look at, or when you reread how she behaves and how conducts herself when Chicken Little gets thrown into the river, she seems very calm and neutral, almost intrigued by his death. She didn't tell on Sula, and I don't think that's because of her loyalty or her contract of friendship. I think it's because she liked that secret. I think it's because there was a darkness that she didn't even want to acknowledge, and that's why she suppressed it so much. And remember, in a previous video I spoke about acknowledging the dark and the light of yourself. However, it seems like Nell, the character, was not able to acknowledge it until later on, at least anyway. Whilst Nell was busy playing Miss Goody Two Shoes, Sula slept with Nell's husband. So, like, under normal social context, that's awful. However, we have to remember, Sula does not adhere to social norms. So in her head, sleeping with her best friend's husband was like a thing to do. I think she even makes reference to it. Like, I only effed him. Like, relax. It wasn't that deep to her. Nell was the one that took it upon herself to socially disgrace Sula. How else did the rest of the medallion find out that Jude had cheated on Nell? She didn't make reference to her husband coming out of the relationship and fornicating. She blamed it solely on Sula. So it's just kind of weird. She wants this idea, she wants this reputation of like good woman, married young, has her children, goes to church. Now Sula leaves, goes to university, explores America to her best ability, sleeps with men, has adventure, returns back to the medallion because she feels like there's nothing else to do out there. So she comes back home, excuses her grandmother from the house, and is living there. I don't know what happens. That doesn't get mentioned, but Sula gets sick, and to my understanding, she's under 30. Maybe she caught an STI. I don't know, but anyway, she gets sick, and so again, here comes Miss Nell with her little goody two-shoe pretend persona, and comes to check her brethren. But she's not, that's what I'm saying, like, you have to be careful for a gal like Nell, you know, because she's not checking her because there's like a desire to. She's checking her because it's the thing to do. One checks somebody when they're suffering from long-term illness. So she goes and she checks her, and Sula's very raw, Sula's very authentic, very organic and honest. And whilst Sula didn't have the power to excuse herself from the conversation, Nell thought it the best time at Sula's weakest point to converse and question her about her cheating with her husband, in which Sula's very upfront, Sula's very blunt and says, boy, it is what it is. To me, it was just like a thing to do. She mentions at the end of their visit, I'm not coming to visit you again. That's not verbatim, but that's what she implies. And it makes you think, did she go there to check Sula? Or did she go there to get the answers when Sula couldn't run away from the question? Something very similar happens when Nell, as the church woman, goes to check Sula's grandma, because her grandma was Sula put her grandma into a home, which was very, very unheard of during those times. It was like a very middle-class white people thing to do. So anyway, she goes to check her grandma, but Sula's grandma, being Sula's grandma, blasts Nell. She's like, you didn't feel no way when Chicken Little died. You found comfort, you found interest in that. And again, because her feelings were so hurt, or another way of saying it, because her darkness was being acknowledged, she excused herself. So ultimately, after I finished reading the book, I couldn't put it down. By the time that Sula had mutilated her little finger, I couldn't put it down. There were some parts when I just felt like, honestly, I don't think I'm intelligent enough to understand this. And there were other parts where it was like, oh my God, Toni Morrison was so lucky to have a mind like that. Look, this is only a snapshot of her mindset, of her thoughts, of how she used words and created art. Imagine actually having that brain consistently. What a beautiful woman. Overall, I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. This book, once I finished the book and was slightly confused, I'm gonna be honest, so I feel like I got majority of what was being said, but just to confirm it, I went and I checked to see what everybody else's reviews were saying, and they had a similar understanding as me. This word, binary thinking, and it basically touches on, in the West, we use words in its binary format. It's on and off, it's day and night, it's good and bad, but we neglect the fact that majority of things in life are actually on a spectrum. Like, sometimes I'm good, sometimes I'm bad, sometimes I'm beautiful, sometimes I'm clapped. Initially, Nell looks like, you know, the well-behaved, decent, young, civilized, classy, cured woman, and she's not. Like, there's darkness in her light. She is not as great as she would like to think she is. Sula as well, you know, she's the bad person, the promiscuous person, the hoe, the evil witch. But actually, her being evil helped the medallion to run a lot smoother. You'll find out why I say that when you read the book. Towards the end of the book, I began to realise that there's a bit of Sula in quite a few of the people I know, myself included. Some of our ideas are abnormal and unique and go against the grain, but we should take from Sula, she didn't give a heck. She had her thought, she had her idea, she lived life well, and that's what we should be aspiring to do. It's not all the time that we need to do because it has been done. Sometimes we have to reevaluate and look for ourselves and make our own decisions. It is my intention to read Sula when I'm like 50. Hopefully my understanding of literature will just be a lot more expanded, and I will be able to show Sula the respect, because ultimately that's what she deserves, you know, the respect from the get-go, as opposed to waiting towards the end. It was literally in the last, like 20-30 pages that I realised she wasn't bad. All it was that she didn't adhere to social norms, and that's what made it difficult, or I was seeing her through the lens of others. I was seeing her, which is so, and again, doesn't that just speak of Toni Morrison's greatness? For the couple of months that I was reading this book, I didn't listen to the song by Jamila Woods. Once I finished reading it, I listened to the song again, and it just took on a whole new level of understanding and meaning, and I appreciate the song even more now. That is my review of Sula. I hope you enjoyed. Please share any books that you would want us to read together. Talking of such, please like, comment and subscribe, and share. Please share this video with anybody you think it would resonate with. Bless up. Bless up, take care, and Eyeame in everything.